So, again, this is the 16th Annual Critical Animal Studies Conference, the North American Critical Animal Studies Conference, and at Fort Lewis College. Fort Lewis College is a public institution. We don't have an ROTC, which is kind of cool. On Veterans Day, we're not tunneling a whole bunch of people, working class people to military, to kill poor people. So, that being said, we have a wonderful panel. So John Liberatore will be videoing, and then he'll be taking questions and comments at the end of the video that he pre-recorded, and so we'll be calling him in and then plugging him in. And then we also have Maddie Anderson, so she'll be coming up here, hopefully sitting here. And then we also have one other presenter, which is Jonathan, and he'll be coming up in the next 30 seconds. And so each individual has about 25 minutes. They're going to look at Sean Parson for a time check. And at the very end, we'll have Q&A and questions and comments and things of that sort. Again, if you have any needs or anything of that sort, please let us know. It's a fully volunteer organization. I think everybody thinks because it's an institute, we're fully funded, and we've got staff and everything. Every year we have approximately anywhere between 300 to 50 people that come to this conference in North America. We did it here last year, and so we brought it back here because, as we know, the academic industrial complex is growing and funding a lot more adjuncts and full-time, and they're requiring IT support and sound and renting rooms to be a common place in some of the larger institutions, which the larger institutions are most likely in the major cities like Los Angeles and the Bay Area and Miami and Houston, Dallas, and New York, and Philly, and things of that sort. So, and we, of course, love nature. I'm hoping that you all are here because you like nature and the environment and you don't want to exploit it. But we do have people from Denver, Boulder, Flagstaff, Missouri, right? Okay, Missouri came in. Any other cities that flew in? Iowa, Dallas, Santa Barbara,
Kentucky.
Louisville, Kentucky, of course. Anybody else? Okay, cool. Please get to know each other. Critical Animal Studies is a scholarly and activist framework rooted in anarchism, intersectionality, and total liberation. It's not just academic, it's not just activist, and I think both complement each other, as we all know, and I think activists can really learn from people that study and examine the history of our movements, so we don't repeat it, and we don't repeat the repression that has occurred to the animal liberation movement. No other movement in the last 10, 20 years has dealt with the amount of repression strategically by the U.S. government as much as the animal liberation movement. And I'm not speaking about oppression, I'm looking at repression. And when we look at that, we have to look at the laws that have been really targeting. So it is against the law to take pictures under the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act in 2006 to take pictures of animals being slaughtered or being sent to slaughter. And that is a terrorist act. So we have to really push back on these things. There's signs around, take pictures that you're against the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, get it into common discussions at your home, at school, et cetera, et cetera. There's signs on tables and things of that sort. So please, please really understand the history of our movement and where it's come from and where it's going, and I think we're becoming more sophisticated on our identities and how we work with other movements. So thank you so much for everyone being here. And without any further ado, I am not sure, I think Jonathan is going first. No. I don't know. Do we have Johnny? Okay, I'm looking. Okay, Maddie's actually assigned to go first, so out of respect of everybody, we'll have Maddie go first, Jonathan, and then John Liberatore. So thank you so much, and Maddie take it away.
Okay, cool. So I'm somebody who feeds off of people's energy. So if you're feeling something that I say, like give me some snaps, or be like, yeah, or like, give me something. 'Cause I get real weird and awkward when I'm just like talking to walls. So be interactive, please, if you can. Woo! Thank you. That's great already. So, my name is Madi. I'm a student here at Fort Lewis College. I'm a non-traditional student, so I kind of stopped school for a minute and then got back into school, and here I am. And you'll get to know me a little bit throughout all of this. Can you hear me without this? Can I like walk away from this?
No.
No?
You can walk with the mic because we are live streaming.
Oh, got you. I'll just stay here. So first, just by a show of hands, who has heard of eco-ability liberatory therapy? That's right, none of y'all, because I came up with it. Okay, cool.
Okay, we're gonna.
So there's a really funny story behind this, and I'll tell you now, instead of later, so we can get into the actual like scholarly type stuff. Call me a good scholar, so you know. So this was actually a paper that I wrote originally, and I turned it into one of my psychology teachers. I studied criminology as well as pre-law, and I'm trying to get away from psychology. I want to go to law school not next semester, but the semester after. So that's the goal. And obviously I've turned away from some of the psych stuff that I've learned, and then I turned in this paper, and I was so proud of it. I'm like, man, eco-ability liberatory therapy, like we're getting somewhere in life, like this is important stuff. And I ended up getting a D on this paper, and it actually, I had to drop the class because the paper was worth 60% of the grade. And so I was distraught, I was so sad, and I took it to Dr. Nocella. I was like, yo, like, I have to drop out of this class, like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, like, things are happening for me right now. And he's like, well, forget it, let's just publish it, this is awesome. I'm like, what? You want to publish my paper that just got a D? Like, all right, cool. So, yeah. So this is me. We don't have to go into too much of who I am, but I think under the intersectional, like, feminist framework, it's really important to know, like, who you are, right? Like, you need to know who I am and why I'm telling you about these different things. So, like, for myself, now that I'm looking at this, I look like I'm super into myself. I got like so many. That's my cat up there though, man. Shout out to my cat. He's awesome. Yeah, so we'll get into all this. You all can read. But I am a Latinx woman of the earth, and I think that's kind of like the first identity that I really actually sit with, and especially organizing in such a white space. It's very difficult, and I have a lot of passing privilege, right? Because you look at me and you could assume that I could be white. I am white, but my mother is Brazilian, and so I think that kind of adds to another layer of things here. But we'll get into all that. So, in general, the understanding of mutual liberation, you have to at the core of mutual liberation, like you are inherently liberated, right? Like, does that make sense? Like, there's so much liberation to be shared with one another, and if you're doing it in a mutual aid type of way, which has very anarchist roots, it's beautiful and it's powerful, and I've seen it so many times. And one time specifically that I'm going to talk about here is the No Dapple movement. So a lot of me and my friends, we actually, shout out to Fort Lewis College, we had the biggest caravan of students who went to Standing Rock. We had about, how many people was it, Nocella?
71.
How many?
71.
71 students. And that was also community members too, so keep that in mind. Yeah, them snaps, yes. So, yeah, in this kind of framework of therapy that I'm trying to convey here, it's important to remember that, yes, you can be liberated by liberating the earth and by liberating the animals, human and non-human, but it's really important to remember that we belong to the earth and the earth does not actually belong to us, right? So, like, in turn, hopefully what you'll understand from all of this, if I do it correctly, is that, yes, it is good to liberate the earth, and yes, it is empowering for yourself, but the end goal is not just to liberate yourself, right? Like, you don't want to have, like, this horrible understanding of of who you are just as like, oh, well, at least I'm going to get liberated back. Like, that's not actually the goal. Makes you kind of egotistical or self-centered. But yeah, so underneath all of this, you can see this is a lot of, I don't think this was everybody, but this was a lot of people that went to No Dapple, and you can actually see the sign. It's somewhere around here, right there. So that has been to Standing Rock and back. If you want to feel its magical powers, you definitely can, because they're there. Yeah, so the earth provides everything that human and non-human animals need, and while it continues to be exploited for financial gain, and this financial gain, which we can refer to as capitalism, everybody knows what capitalism is? Sweet. So yeah, it's a system that is obviously very unnatural to us, to our planet, to our fellow species that we, cohabitate with, and all that. Hope nobody's down for capitalism. Is anybody down for capitalism in here? I should have asked that first. Everybody's like anti-capitalist, right? Cool. All right. So yeah, Standing Rock. So I kind of wanted to talk about the environmental racism behind Standing Rock, because I think so many people, we've heard a lot about like the indigenous organizing that's going on. I know that there's going to be a lot of No Dapple stuff, and so I don't want to get too much into the details, because I feel like we're going to get it in other places. But what really struck out to me, especially as somebody who was raised in the Bay Area, environmental racism is real. Like, this is a real thing that a lot of people have to endure, and it's a reality. And so the significance of Standing Rock, if most of you guys didn't know, the pipeline was actually supposed to go through Bismarck. Who knew that? Raise your hand. Okay, cool. So y'all woke. All right. So there's a little bit of a story though, right? So they had put up a petition, the white people of Bismarck, and it's a predominantly white, very rich area. They put a petition together and they were like, hey, we don't want you guys to damage our water. This could be potentially harmful to us. We don't want this. And the petition ended up making it go downstream into Standing Rock Reservation, where there are brown people and they are economically disadvantaged. Coincidence? I think not. So it's something that you see so often, and it's awful. And I can think of many different examples, and probably you guys can too in your own communities. But yeah, so I hope that for the remainder of this conference or weekend get together, we can kind of stop referring to this holiday that's supposed to be coming up as Thanksgiving. Don't say it. Just don't do it. It's fall break. It's Thanks-taking. You can whatever. But it's a horrible genocide of people that are still living today and are flourishing. And so I think I just wanted to take a minute to note that. And so last year at this time, or I guess Thanks-taking time last year, we were in Standing Rock and we made it to the front lines, and it was just so powerful. To be around people that were not only praying and being involved in activism in a way that was like so far removed from my understanding of activism. It was very, it was traditional, and it was centered around Native American people, right? And so it had a lot to do with prayer. It had a lot to do with just sitting with yourself and being quiet. And to go against that would be obviously disrespectful. So it was just really important that we did activism in the way that they wanted to do it, which was awesome. It was a great experience for me, and it actually kind of like turned my whole thought process, because before that I was like, let's just tear the shit down, let's whatever, which is good in some circumstances, but obviously when people are showing you their ways, you don't want to be disrespectful, and it was tactical as well. So yeah, when defending the earth and all that live on it, you want to protect your mother. Referring to the earth as your mother is so important. Like, I think that we forget this earth is what made us, right? Like, we don't have to get all into your own religious and spiritual beliefs, but this the space that we're in, it can thrive without us. In fact, it would thrive even better without us, right? But thank you. But we're here, and so what can we do to get rid of the destruction that other human animals have done to this earth? Like, it's our responsibility, right? So then the next thing I wanted to kind of talk about before we can get into really eco-ability liberatory therapy is what's important. Is it veganism or anti-speciesism? And I know that my amazing co-panelist over here is going to talk more about this. So again, not too much. We won't go too much into depth. But I know you guys all know at least one of those whack vegans who, like an Instagram vegan. Y'all know what an Instagram vegan is? No? Okay. So there's these Instagram vegans. This is a real thing. I don't know what a hashtag would be for you to find them, but there's like these like workout vegans who like, they're just like all about, they're like, oh yeah, like it doesn't have anything to do with the animals or like anti-speciesism or anything like that. It just has to do with like, ooh, like this is healthy for me. And like, good, yeah, you want to take care of your body, right? Like that's really important. But at the same time, like the whole like I don't know even what it would be. I guess it would be exoticizing veganism or something. I'm not entirely sure, but I don't know. And then it aids in this like objectification of women. There's like all these women with like vegan tattooed on their butts, and they're like, yeah. It's like, no, don't do that. But I mean, third wave feminism, if you're down for that, go ahead, that's cool. But I think that it's really important to remember, like, being vegan is actually like a way of life, right? Like, you don't want to be vegan and like be rocking like a leather jacket. Like, pretty problematic. And obviously all of you guys are onto these things, but there's a lot of people, you would be so surprised. They're like, well, I'm vegan, you know, I don't eat flesh, I don't, you know, do all of these things. But they're still wearing suede. They're still like perpetuating in this industry that causes harm on another species, and it's really problematic. So yeah, he will talk more about anti-speciesism and how significant that is. But I just wanted to give a shout out to Elena actually, because at the conference, last conference that we went to, which was in Erie, Colorado, we were talking a lot about that, and it was awesome. It made me do some more digging. So. Shout out to Alana, snaps. Yeah, and then I think on top of everything else, there's just this like spiritual and ethical benefit of adopting a plant-based diet. And it's kind of like, I know y'all have heard that quote from Martin Luther King, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so it kind of goes under this, like, if one is oppressed, we all are oppressed. And it's just so like simple for me to understand, but it's in a space like this, it's difficult for others. So. Not with you guys so much, but on my campus. So, pero what is eco-ability? Does anybody know what eco-ability really is? We can just go around. I feel like I've been talking too much. What are some like main things that you really dig about eco-ability? You can just like shout some things out.
Disability justice.
Totally. Anything else? There's also a chart with words right here if you'd like to say things from the chart.
Difference in diversity.
Totally, yeah, definitely. And then just like overall against forms of oppression and domination. And so, yeah, it's just a really great theoretical. Shout out to Dr. Nocello, wherever he's at. Awesome. So yeah, so the interweaving of animal, disability, and environmental justice and liberation together, which, I mean, essentially is total liberation, which is important to all of us. So eco-ability stresses that connecting with nature and the world around you will unite you with many different things that you may long for. And then just as a personal experience, I was born in Fresno, California, and I moved out to Oakland when I was about 12. Did a little bit of bouncing back and forth. But living in Oakland was a very strange experience. I went to City College in San Francisco, and that was also a very strange experience. But I think living in such a big city, like at the time, I was a lot younger, and I was like, man, this is dope. Like I'm in the hopping city. Like things are cool. I'm cool because I live here. But I found out that really wasn't. I was actually a lot more depressed. If I can just get really serious with all of you for a while, I didn't feel like myself at all. My experience growing up has been, difficult. My father's been kind of like in and out of incarceration, and then I've moved like in different places for different reasons. But Oakland, there was something about Oakland and San Francisco in particular that just did something to me. I don't know what it was. It was just, I think it had a lot to do with like the big buildings and my disconnection from the earth and my disconnection from the animals and my disconnection from people. Like, there's just this very big culture of busyness in San Francisco. If you guys have ever been there, I'm sure some of you have. Yeah, cool. So yeah, it's a very busy place, and it's kind of, I got a lot of stuff done there, but I lost a part of myself because I wasn't actually connected to my true identity, right? Like I was so focused on getting from A to B, and whatever came in between. And so, yeah, it was just a very strange experience for me. But I think that also has to do with like the pollution and the way that that land has been so colonized. I think it's important to know that all land in the United States has been colonized, and all land everywhere. I mean, there's borders and boundaries and all of this like binary bullshit that doesn't really matter. But at the same time, there's something that's extremely like, I don't know, capitalism and colonialism is just so much felt in the Bay Area. And I don't know if you guys have ever felt it when you were there, but yeah, it's just, there's a separation of all species, and it's through, obviously, the socially constructed binaries. And so, yeah, nature's in humans and non-human animals, just so far apart, and it was awful. So, I guess fast forward to now, in modern day times, I'm living in Durango, I'm hiking more, I'm able to actually enjoy the earth for what it naturally is. I mean, it's so foreign to me that I can actually go on a hike and get lost somewhere. Like, I need to take a compass with me, I need to like know where I'm at, because I could genuinely get lost. Like, there's something beautiful about that, you know, not having civilization. I mean, we have Walmart, which really sucks, but we don't have these huge corporations everywhere in Durango, which I really appreciate. Like the mom and pop, even though it's a little bit more expensive and I'm a broke college student, it still works, you know? And so this kind of leads into capitalism and how capitalism is not ethical and will never be ethical, ever, at all. Like, there's no way that you could swing capitalism and it would be ethical or moral or correct or natural for any of us. There's just no way for it to happen. Capitalism, I mean, by definition, perpetuates greed and competition, and it makes everything about a monetary value that really doesn't mean shit. Like, this concept to me is just so strange. It's like, so we have to work all of our day, we have to stay extremely busy doing some shit, right? Like, whatever it is, and you have to stay so busy, right? And like, you have to make this money so that you can pay for your bills, so that you can have shelter, so you can have water and food. It's like, why? That doesn't make any sense to me, and it never really has. So yeah, that's my first problem with capitalism. It needs to go. Yeah, and it kind of creates this like culture of like, well, if you don't have a lot of material things, like you're not actually successful. Like if you don't have the cool shoes or like the poppin' house or like whatever, you ain't driving a Mercedes, blah blah. Like, who cares? You know. And this example that has always sat with me, I'm a spoken word artist, so I write a lot of poetry. I haven't been writing recently, but something that really sat with me in a poem that I wrote a while back was, I kind of did a play on words with this example: cut down trees to make more money, but robbing ourselves of clean air. And like, that's so true. Like I'm saying, like we're aiding in this industry that literally will cut down trees that gives us air, which is nourishment to our body, so that we can continue survival. So that we can like buy weird, I don't know, the concept is just so strange to me. But obviously it's very easy to lose perspective on what is important when we're operating under capitalism, and it makes us hate ourselves, like on purpose. That's a goal of capitalism, is to make you hate yourself so much, and it's just such a dangerous thing. Yeah, and staying busy doing dumb shit, I already said that. Reiterate. So, how does eco-ability liberatory therapy work, you may ask? I'm going to give you the answer. So you bring humans into this natural world, right? You actually understand that there's a world outside of working and businesses and whatever else you're staying busy with in your day. School. Who hates school? Who's a student and hates school? God, I hate school. I love Fort Lewis. I'm sure somebody's tuned in. Shout out to all my professors. You guys are awesome. But I don't like school. I mean, it keeps me, I love learning. I think there's something beautiful about learning about things and having access to knowledge, because not everybody does, and I'm so blessed to have this experience, to be at a college. But at the same time, there's just something very dangerous about these institutions. So anyways, I have close to 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try to figure out quickly what is the most important. I start talking too much. So yeah, bringing people into this natural world and actually understanding what the natural world is. The natural world, there is no grocery stores, people. Like, you know where your food comes from. You don't know how many people, when you go into the grocery store, how many people have touched your food? Like, that's weird. How many people have been exploited to get your apple or your banana or whatever the case is? And then, you know, add into the torture of animals, and that's just a whole nother level of it. So that's the first element, is bringing humans into the natural world and teaching them what the natural world is. And you want to make sure, just as a side note, that you're not aiding in something that's problematic, like clear cutting. Like you don't want to ski. I don't know if you guys are skiers, I'm sorry. But you don't want to perpetuate in more clear cutting. So if you do ski or you do snowboard, like maybe sticking to places, or I don't know, I just don't ski or snowboard, so I don't know how to get around that. I'm trying to be nice, but yeah, it's not the greatest thing to do. Sorry, guys. But yeah, you want to make sure that the things that you're doing, like if you're taking a hike, like you don't want to be destructive to the earth, right? Like you don't want to be making this huge imprint on the earth. Things like that. So then giving back to the earth in turn, learning how to take care of Mother Earth, as well as all of the species, and kind of like aiding in this mutual relationship. Treating it like a friend. That's the way that I think of it. It's like if you are in this relationship with your friend or a partner, you want it to be a beautiful liberatory experience for both of you, right? Like you don't want to just suck whatever you can out of that person. So personalize or humanize the earth and recognize that like you can do that to the earth. You can literally suck her being out of her. So then, yeah, and then the last element would be shedding your understanding of yourself and society, and understanding that you are more than a competitive, dominating, power-hungry being. I got a little carried away with this one. Okay, so it is time for capitalism and all hierarchies to fade, or we will perish. And I do truly believe this. I think that, who knows who Donald Trump is? Y'all ever heard of Donald Trump? Cheeto Puff, number 45. Cool. So I think, unfortunately, like as much as I would like to say it is all Donald Trump and he's a horrible person, I mean he is a horrible person, but as much as I'd like to like shove it on his lap and say that all of this is his fault and all of this is, you know, everything that's going on is his fault, it's really not. Like he's a byproduct of what America really is, right? Like, Donald Trump is not the only person who feels that way, and that's how he got elected. Well, we can talk about that, I guess, later, because I don't personally believe in voting either. But anyways, yeah, I think all of these systems of control really make you not only hate yourself, but hate the world around you, and that is extremely dangerous. And so essentially, at the root of eco-ability liberatory therapy, you need to liberate yourself by liberating the earth and liberating the beings that cohabitate with you on this earth, and respect all life. No dapple.
Hey everyone, just hold up a second. Let me switch this up. No, this is this one. All right, hey everybody. My name is Jonathan Dickstein. I'm from.
Sorry, just got it.
Oh, okay. I thought that was like a mistake on the first slide. I would never prepare this on the airplane. I would never have done that. So I'm at UCSB, and maybe I'll just go right away and give a shout to some of the groups that I'm working with. Not only, but some. We have a nice undergraduate group, UCSB here, Health, Environment, Animal Rights, that's growing every year, Direct Action Everywhere, some Colorado representation in the corner. Animal Rights UCSB, and Vegan Studies at UCSB, which is a burgeoning minor at our university, headed by Renan Leroux. It really is an honor to be here. So many amazing scholars, activists, and just inspiring people. So I hope I can do this invitation justice. I work mostly in actually South Asian religion and religious studies, but animals and religion. I'm a PhD student at UCSB, but also work with a lot of these groups. My focus today is how, and with much more visibility on and off campus for liberationist advocacy and activism, how veganism, this nebulous idea of veganism, can be best conceptualized and used to further our causes. Another title I could say for this presentation is what I would call the problem of big veganism, which you've never heard of because I coined that shit myself too, just last week. And I use that phrase to describe when veganism, and I hope I don't have to do this every time, but just assume it, attempts to function conceptually for ideas like anti-speciesism, animal liberation, or even more ambitiously, total liberation. This surfaces commonly in the eternal plant-based versus vegan debates, but also specifically for today's topic, when vegans have to confront problems of racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, and classism in their communities, digital or physical. So, yay, Colin Kaepernick's vegan. I mean, that's kind of cool, but whatever. You'll see why. So, Colin Kaepernick celebrated his vegan birthday, which I don't know when mine was. But shortly thereafter, of course, in vegan spaces, what we see is the inevitable racist or classist or otherwise hating comments that come about. Also, I should make a quick shout out. I forgot to do this. If you don't know Unique Vance and Aaron Luxor at Vegan Voices of Color website, I'm kind of jacking some of Unique's slides from a presentation we did together because she's doing some of mine for her presentation somewhere else. So it's okay, so some of this Kaepernick stuff. But it makes the point exactly, is that in vegan spaces almost immediately, yeah, there's some laudatory comments, but most of the time it's just piece of shit, piece of shit. I hope people won't turn away from veganism because of him, another cheap, egomaniacal social justice warrior. So I highlight this because in these spaces, this stuff exists. That's not up for debate, and I'm not even going to act like it's up for debate. The issue I highlight is that the response to such individuals and discourse like this, whether those displayed modestly in the Kaepernick example or in this example, where we have a young woman of color who's obviously hunted this deer, immediately from further comments gets these, which you can just read and see what happens immediately. Right, so we get this more egregious racism in vegan spaces almost immediately. And what I would say is that when this takes place, what happens is vegans have to come to the defense that no, veganism is not just about not buying this or not buying that. But if you're vegan, you're necessarily anti-racist, anti-classist, anti-heterosexist. And kind of my point today is that what happens, in my opinion, is that in a very well-intentioned meaning to bring this intersectional lens through, and especially an anti-speciesist lens, but not only, is that we start to blow up veganism to become completely unworkable. It basically becomes a synonym for total liberation. And I think there's a problem because we lose any practical utility whatsoever of the term veganism if we even want to use it. And we can have that conversation about whether we want to use it at all. But I'm saying is that we exhaust it of any practical utility. And I'm not against using the term, but I'm saying let's harness its utility, its practical utility, but don't try to blow it up into this big veganism, which I would say then tries to almost usurp and co-opt total liberationism. So, UCSB, David Pello, know him if you don't. It's like the nicest guy ever. The concept of total liberation stems from a determination to understand and combat all forms of inequality and oppression. It is comprised of 4 pillars: an ethic of justice and anti-oppression, inclusive of people, non-human animals, and ecosystems, anarchism, anti-capitalism, and an embrace of direct action tactics. I hope everyone's on board with this shit right here. Yeah. So here's the kind of issue I have, and it's a little bit tough because I'm kind of actually pulling this out of even the CAS volume, right? So this is by Weizenfeld and Joy in the Defining CAS volume, and basically saying a vegan practice, and then is all these things that you can read on the screen. And kind of just this little intervention that I would like to do in this is just this, when I look at it, I say, nah, that intervention is not the vegan praxis. That's a total liberation praxis. If you're a total liberationist, these are things you do. And we see it again, right? In the same volume, there's another amazing quote by Jenkins and Stanescu on what veganism involves. And I would say again, if I could pop up into that top left corner, just total liberationism, that way it makes more sense from my lens. And I'll get to it why I don't think veganism works in that sense. But what I think, and these are great, I'm not saying I'm not on board with anything they're talking about. I'm just saying that for me it makes more sense as saying total liberationism is not just a person, when we go down the list. What I really like in this definition is all of this praxis-oriented language. It's outcome, it's commitment, it's expression, it's conduct. It's things you do. It's not just something you think about but doesn't manifest in those behaviors. So from this slide, the deployable takeaway, I would say, what we can use practically is the uses of terms like expression, outcome, and even in a sense commitment, which I find much more valuable than kind of this nebulous idea of vegan praxis that's pretty much everything to where basically it means like good person. And we might as well just not use the term anymore. So in short, the strict confinement of veganism to a conduct descriptive role, albeit exclusively exclusionary, meaning negative duties, things we don't do, and only that. So that's kind of my argument. That's how veganism should be confined. And by that use, then, veganism is something, but not intrinsically about something. So let me say that again. Veganism as a praxis is something, meaning it involves actual negative duties, exclusionary behaviors, and it can be deployed by various social justice angles, which I'll get into later. But it's not about anything intrinsically. It's not about anything. It's a tool, it's a tactic. That could be the title too. Like, veganism not as tactic, but is tactic. Right? And in this framework, it's a tactic that has to be inflexibly used, not just in animal liberation, but in total liberation. So I would say, and in my definition, which seems to be almost the commonplace definition, but then gets only blown up in other situations, is then veganism is not the way it was described in those earlier definitions, which I would say are total liberationism, but veganism is just the exclusion as far as is practicable, and practicable is always a hard term to unpack, all use and consumption of non-human animals and animal products. No in theory, there's no accompanying theory or philosophy just with veganism. It doesn't mean that we're not talking about total liberationism. Actually, that's what I want to talk about. I just want to stop talking about veganism as if it's total liberation. But then when I say that, it's like, I'm glad some people are laughing because that was like my favorite slide to put together. Why? And my answer is just simply, the more that we talk about veganism, we don't talk about anti-speciesism. We don't talk about actual animals. We don't talk about actual individuals. Veganism refers to vegans. Vegans are people. We shouldn't be talking, or human people. We shouldn't be talking about human people. We should be talking about non-human people when we're talking about veganism. And when we're talking about veganism, we can also say, then when we divest it of that value, then when we deploy veganism in anti-racist struggles or anti-ableist struggles, then it makes sense. It says, okay, now we're going to use veganism, and we'll talk about that in a minute, how it can be used in these other struggles. But it puts the focus where it needs to be. Animal liberation, total liberation, and as Marie said, not just about like your vegan butt tattoo. So, what do we got next? Okay, so here's, where am I at? A little bit?
About 14 minutes.
Ah, I've been talking fast. I think it's fun enough. So here's a little model, kind of how the way I would frame this. And I think it's going to lend a lot of, I like the segue from what Marie talked about and what was talked about earlier, and then later on, Hannah and Elena will talk about things as well, which I think are all wrapped up into anti-speciesism and especially total liberation. So under that model that David Pillow worked out, we'd say that you have this baseline of total liberation. And, oops. And I wanted to make one, okay, a baseline of total liberation. And then above that, we have these different sites of resistance that I would say all are about it. Now I wrote here, and I said I had to remind myself, so this is one thing I'll read off my script that I never read. I was like, write them, and then I never read them. But this one I'll read. This is an oversimplified image of total liberation terrain, and these sites of resistance, of which I've only named a few, as you well know, do not function independently. This is clearly embedded in discourse, as but one example. This is clearly embedded in discourse around racism and speciesism, though not only. Exhibited well in Claire Jean Kim's term, zoologo racism. If you don't know who Claire Jean Kim is at UC Irvine, know Claire Jean Kim. Also at Irvine, or to quote Frank Wilderson, quote, the humanities assume the corporeal and psychic integrity of all sentient beings. Afro-pessimism argues that integrity is vouchsafed by its absence in the figure of the black, and that violence is key to this, in the words of Fanon, species divide. So in Afro-pessimist discourse, especially brought up by Claire Jean Kim, is this idea that we can't talk about race and species separately. That's just a little backlog, back just to say that I'm putting this up here like this, but we know that's not how they function. So it's not that we can make all other kinds of ways to organize this. But even if crude, this image will help illustrate veganism as tactic, and a completely insufficient tactic on its own. Moreover, it shows that the foregrounding of veganism obscures the total liberationist backbone and enables racist, speciesist, ableist, and other vegans, quote unquote, to occupy ostensibly liberationist spaces. You know, because veganism. I can be here because I'm a vegan, even though I'm a racist and an ableist and so on. So here, we can make all these circles for every site and then how they overlap. So when we're enacting anti-speciesism, so that's the site, that's a site of resistance, and these are some of those sites, things that we know all well: animal, quote-unquote, farming, entertainment, labor, vivisection, and so on. But there's others that are not oftentimes talked about in vegan spaces. Why aren't they talked about? Because veganism, even in common language, and even the way that I want to say we should deploy it, is about negative duties. Don't do X. Don't do Y. Refrain from X. Refrain from Y. But what about all these other sites that animal exploitation have produced? That capitalism have produced? That environmental violence has produced? Predation, starvation, disease, habitat destruction, shelter killing, and homelessness. I use homelessness here to mean a few things, but specifically in the context of open rescue and rescuing animals that are rescued from animal oppression industries and then having to rehome them. Like, that's a site of positive intervention. We have to provide homes for them. But when we talk about veganism, veganism doesn't deal with any of these things. So as a vegan, I can, as an example, even if I have the means to save animals from a kill shelter tonight that I know will die, and they will die as victims of speciesism, of capitalism, of oppression, veganism does not require me to do that. All it requires is that when I order my pizza tonight, I get the tomato pie, or something like this, and or whatever, you know. So basically, so the point is that we have to understand that, and we get more philosophical about it, but a lot of these positive duties are just as strong or almost as strong as all of the negative duties, and veganism doesn't touch him. Veganism doesn't touch him. So it's this kind of strange idea of, we could have a longer conversation, but who's actually saving more animals? Who's actually fighting more oppression? The person that goes and rescues 20 animals a year, or the person that has a lot of income and just buys vegan products? And then maybe in some aspect of that first person's life, there's some trace of some animal product somewhere. I mean, obviously the best answer is not to do either, to save the animals and not have any of those quote-unquote products. But the point is that veganism itself is completely, not only is it definitely not total liberation itself, but even within fighting anti-speciesism, it completely cannot do the work that we assume it does. Yeah, so if you've ever done, just one more note on that is if you've ever done advocacy, a lot of people do kind of on-the-street advocacy about veganism, and then you have those people come up who have no intention of going vegan or care about animals, but they want to give you the indigenous peoples though argument, or they want to give you some other argument. They ask about wildlife all the time, and Max talked about wildlife quite a bit. And vegans who are not tuned into how veganism is insufficient, even though it's indispensable, it's insufficient, falter. They don't know how to respond. What do we do about wildlife suffering? What do we do about disease? What do we do about shelter killing? And it just doesn't roll off the tongue nearly as simply, as easily. But what's more important, I think so, I was in LA recently for a POC animal advocacy vegan conference. And AFCO, who's one of the founders of Black Vegans Rock, killed it, mic drop killed it. But one of the points was that she was saying that she comes at veganism from anti-racism. And part of it, I a little bit kind of am jumping on the back of her invocation of Claire Jean Kim, in the sense that she was mostly talking about it in the sense of we can't disentangle the language of species out from the language of race. So it's a site of resistance against racism. But I would even more so say that veganism, as it pertains on the ground, with exclusion from all the things that we readily know, is a way to combat other sites, other aspects. And it can be a tactic deployed by people who centralize their focus in these sites of resistance to fight at those sites of oppression. So what kind of gets really difficult is that when I kind of talk a little bit about this, I guess, or maybe all of y'all are like, yeah, I know this, but it's fun to listen to you talk about it, or not fun. The idea is that when we start to talking about, let's say, let's divest veganism of its bigness, of this big veganism. Let's divest it. Let's exhaust it of this aggrandizement that makes people feel complacent after they've gone vegan, that they have no positive duties, that they don't have to start sanctuaries, that they don't have to donate money to sanctuaries, that they don't have to deal with shelters, they don't have to deal with homelessness, habitat destruction, and so on, is that then we start to really get more in tune to what anti-speciesism itself demands. I don't know, that might be great. Oh. Yeah. So finally, as a tactic, veganism can then be understood as deployable by various human liberation issues, whether it's anti-racism, decolonization, feminism, labor exploitation, food justice, and so on. I mean, we could go on forever. That's why I had those little dots on the side of the last slide. And so on, individually and collectively, under the language of total liberation. Surely, veganism as tactic is inflexible inflexible in 99% of cases, 99.9% of cases. It is inflexible under an animal liberation framework. But even if it's inflexible, it's still a tactic nevertheless. It's a tool. It's a strategy. By confining veganism to a conduct descriptive role, advocates enhance the visibility of anti-speciesism within total liberation, and thereby work to rectify the routine marginalization and exclusion of animal justice from social justice discourse. Thank you.
So fun panel so far, fun conference so far. Everybody having a good time? Cool, awesome, beautiful, all right. In the past, we've put this conference on and we had panels in like 6 different rooms, and there'd be like 3 people in each room. And the Oceana conference, headed by Jess, Carolyn, Colin, Laura, and a few other people, were like, yeah, we need to put everybody in one room and build a community because we know that community is important. So this is why we did one room. And we did have a number of presentations that we did not accept for obvious reasons of everybody getting what we're getting here. And it's developing total liberation, getting to understand that you're not alone in this. People talk about environmentalism, talk about recycling, which is very important, talk about being vegan, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we need the people in this room know that the world is in a major crisis, and it could collapse, and tigers will be wiped off this planet. Polar bears could be wiped off this planet in a decade or less. So while voting might be important to some people, we've got to ante it up. And I think that's why we're in this room, because we really care. And it is lonely to care as much as we care, and caring is nice and all, but we actually have to do work. And that's kind of what you were saying up here, is that action is very important. Direct action gets the goods, right? So I'm going to look for a video. Here we go. This is John Lupinacci. Awesome.
Good day. I'm John Lupinacci from Washington State University, and it's an honor to be presenting at the 5th Annual Eco-Ability Conference. Before getting into this presentation, I'm videoing from North America, and I would like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous people with their...
And just to let you know, whoa, I just interrupted him. How did I do that? Just to let you know, we tried to do an eco-ability conference last year and it didn't go, so he never presented this, just to let y'all know. So he's like, oh, I have an opportunity to show this video to some people. So here we go.
Original inhabitants of the land on which I'm sitting here. And as we convene around challenges and tensions surrounding eco-ability and total liberation, let us not forget that for those of us here in North America, our presence is very much related to the genocidal violence inflicted on this area's native people. And if we take a position for justice, we must extend that position to all that experience unjust suffering, and include in that the often overlooked native peoples still enduring such violence in the 21st century. Also, noting that while we gather for this conference, our diverse sisters and brothers stand together on many fronts, and many of whom have sacrificed life and freedom for the very things we will discuss with relative comfort here today. So my presentation is called Unlearning Normalcy, Valuing Disability, Difference, and Dependency. And this presentation explores alternatives outside of the current dominant assumptions that contribute to the structuring and maintaining of an ableist society. I'll share some of the ways I work with teachers and community activists in regard to ableism and other forms of oppression. I'm aware that there are major limitations to my understandings of and experiences with injustices due to my position as someone who benefits from dominant systems. Systems that privilege human beings over the more than human world, and especially that privilege bodies that are identifiable as white, heterosexual, male, and that can present as able-bodied, albeit for myself intermittent as a person with Crohn's, and able-minded, or as presumably neurotypical, in a culture that sees these characteristics as so-called normal, which I argue that normal is a social construct with material realities for those not fitting into society's so-called normal, and for those there is immense pain and suffering, and isolation and exclusion. I further will present about how I work with professionals allied to communities, or teachers, social workers, counselors, coaches, nurses, etc., to ensure that they are aware of how normality is a problematic construct that emerges from an entangled set of deeply rooted cultural assumptions in place to rationalize and naturalize systems of exploitation like capitalism, racism, sexism, homophobia, speciesism, and ableism, to name a few. It's my position in this presentation that such cruel conditions of this so-called normalcy is learned, it's practiced, and it's maintained, often via schooling, and that such problematic understandings that accompany these systems of exploitation ought to be exposed in efforts to unlearn normalcy by learning to recognize and value difference. Furthermore, to recognize disability as difference. So, I'm an activist teacher from Detroit, now rooted with my family in Eastern Washington, where I'm an equity scholar, activist educator. In other words, I work in teacher education, where I teach folks who work or will work in schools or in their communities to critically and ethically consider the importance of a culturally relevant and empowering education for every person. Examining schooling, I start with considering all children and their teachers as bodies bound within larger economic and exclusionary paradigms, and propose that schools, especially special education, are actually a nexus to prisons and such institutions that impose limitations on one's freedoms and imagination from moving beyond the confines of dominant discursive boundaries of normalcy, or an ableist, white, human, supremacist, and patriarchal society. In this way, our subjectivities, or how we identify or are identified by others, are deeply entangled with dominant notions of this so-called normalcy. Furthermore, the daily routine of neoliberal capitalism becomes so repetitious and unchallenged as part of our disciplined subjectivities, or how we identify, that the atrocities experienced by such exclusionary violence have become normalized, or generally accepted by the masses of those who benefit from ableism, patriarchy, racism, capitalism, etc. So situated within the educational contexts of ecofeminism, critical disability studies, and eco-critical framework for teaching, this work seeks to share possibilities that an eco-ability approach in education might provide for unlearning normalcy and teaching towards inclusive communities, valuing of difference and dependency. So a goal I view as interrelated and interdependent and working in solidarity across differences towards socially just and sustainable communities. While recognizing that there are a vast number of important projects that examine the social and ecological suffering in capitalist culture, this work brings an eco-ability lens to working through some of the difficult contestations I observe working with teachers, learning to think and view students and members of their community beyond the dominant definitions dictated by society, the cultural assumptions that often are working to value, hierarchize, commodify, and set students up for failure because they are never seen by their teachers as equal, capable, or normal. This presentation shares a few pedagogical moments from experiences in teacher education with how I seek to challenge and interrupt perceptions of normalcy and contest false notions of independence as measures of success of personhood in schools and society. Understanding that notions of personhood and independence are culturally mediated and thus directly linked to century-old patterns of beliefs and behaviors that rely on the legacy of a history of privileging certain individuals over equity and the recognition of our existence in and dependency on a complex web of biologically and culturally diverse relationships that make up the living systems to which we all belong. Critiquing neoliberalism. A common thread woven through social justice efforts in all movements, and included in eco-ability, is for activist scholars to respond to efforts of inequity and inequality in a political and economic system of exploitation at work as global systems of capitalism expand to the far reaches of the planet. When confronted with such violent systems as neoliberalism and the free market agendas of multinational corporations, teaching to confront neoliberalism requires what critics of neoliberalism suggest as new ways of thinking about relationships between one another and to the environment. But before I get into any new ways that I'm working with teachers, It's actually good to note that none of what I'm going to talk about is really all that new, rather than it's just been marginalized to near extinction in many Western industrial communities. So, considering how racism, sexism, ableism, speciesism, and neoliberalism all work together, I ask, how can such a destructive way of being be rationalized, justified, or ignored? Neoliberalism is a set of ideas, beliefs, policies, and practices that David Harvey described as proposing that human well-being can be best achieved by liberating individual entrepreneurial freedoms and skills within an institutional framework characterized by strong private property rights, free markets, and free trade. Within neoliberalism, the primary responsibility of the state is to create the necessary conditions under which hypercapitalism can flourish. This leads to deregulation, privatization, and a focus on so-called free markets. In short, neoliberalism is a system of enclosure through deregulation and privatization, and results in an immense amount of exploitation and suffering. Enclosure, specifically the normalcy of commodification, which is a process of making something common a commodity, ensures that individualism, competition, and what I'll illustrate in a moment as an illusion of independence from human others, non-human others, and the environment are valued and even understood as natural or as innate. One of the primary assertions I'm making is that critiques of neoliberalism must include an understanding of how we think and how centric thinking and the accompanying logics of domination are foundational to the maintenance and perpetuations of systems of exploitation like neoliberalism. So recognizing how centric thinking informs and perpetuates seeming commonsensical ideas and beliefs about the kind of systemic thinking that contributes to the conditions of exploitation that make something like neoliberalism work. Noting it really doesn't work. It just works for those who it's privileging, right? So that's important to note when I say that it works. It's my position that by recognizing how such assumptions work to enclose and govern relationships among humans and with the more than human world, that teachers can work with students in their communities to emphasize that there are alternatives. However, in order for critiques and challenges to neoliberalism to be effective, the underlying foundations must be examined and understood. This involves the understanding that the same logic that informs, for example, patriarchy and racism is also the underlying logic that informs domination, exploitation, and the devastation of environment as resources. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where I jump in there in my teaching. I introduce this concept drawing from ecofeminist philosopher Val Plumwood about value hierarchized dualisms. Val Plumwood illustrates how in Western industrial cultures, humans overwhelmingly understand relationality through sets of hierarchized dualisms. This thinking not only justifies and perpetuates anthropocentrism, or humans as superior to all others, it also upholds forms of oppression like racism, classism, sexism, ableism, and so on. All of these forms of oppression rely on value hierarchized dualisms that then inform how we understand and interact with one another. In efforts to help explain how recognizing and understanding the logic structure of value hierarchized dualisms work in Western industrial culture, a logic structure I posit as foundational to neoliberalism and to this notion of normalcy, I work with teachers and future teachers and professionals allied to the community to be able to recognize sets of superior-inferior dualisms and then strive in their classrooms and relationships to provide guidance and opportunity for, say, K-12 students to consider alternatives to dualistic and centric thinking. So I do so by introducing a list of dualisms to how this logic structure works. The list that I'm showing you now includes, but is not limited to, superior-inferior,